To continue our discussion about adoption is Dr. Linda Mintle. Linda is the mother of an adopted son and later had a biological child of her own. She's also a psychologist who sees the adoption process from both sides, and she'll bring us both her personal and professional expertise. And also joining us, Cindy and Drew Newman. Cindy and Drew had a storybook romance. They were first friends, then they fell in love, they married, traveled the world doing television together. They also faced the crushing disappointment of infertility, but that was just the beginning of their story, and they're here to tell us all about the journey, which ended with the adoption 3 months ago of their brand new son, Joshua, who I'm sure we're going to get to meet in person a little bit later on. Cindy and Drew, let me start with you first. After discovering that you could not conceive, how did you come to the determination that you were ready to adopt?
Well, actually, we had discussed that when we were dating. We had said, well, if we can't have kids, we were willing to adopt. And Cindy has a niece who's adopted. On her side of the family, I have a nephew who's adopted. So both our families were familiar and very accepting of it.
Right. But I know along the way that you had, of course, wanted to conceive a child, and there had to be many disappointments that were a part of that. How did you work through the grief of infertility and come to the place where you were able to let go of that?
It was difficult. I think a woman handles the grief more than a man because we have it in our bodies, and I've always wanted to carry a child and have a child. So it was a process. I did absolutely grieve not being able to bear a child. But what happened in the middle of this is, which I think is really key for anyone that's trying to have a child, is we already are a family. The Lord told us you already are a family, the two of you. And to have a child is a welcome addition. So then he started ministering that birth is not the only way to have a family. And I really mean that. And adoption is not a second choice, which we all know because we all have adopted children here. Adoption is an alternative way of having a complete family. And we're so blessed, obviously. I have the chills talking about it.
What was it like for you after coming through that grieving process and then adopting to finally bring this wonderful little boy home?
Well, first we're tired.
No sleep.
So's Joshua, obviously.
Yeah, he's got a good
When you see
there.
a picture of him just then, he's crying. He hasn't changed much. No,
You're smiling.
Yeah.
That's a good sign.
Well, we had, actually it was about 40 hours notice per our request that when we were going to get the child and we could pick up our child. And it was I think a lot of shell shock. It doesn't hit you.
Yeah.
And you walk into a room and someone walks in and hands you a baby and you're like, okay, good. At least he's not an ugly baby. I'm happy.
Which there are no guarantees of either way.
When we were joking on the way back, we stopped to change his diapers. It's okay, now we know he is a boy, and we counted his toes and fingers,
It is a different way of getting a child, and it is a process. Adoption is a process, I think. It's not like, okay, let's go to adopt, because there's so many emotions you go through with knowing that there's two sets of parents. We are the parents that are giving the child life and a future, the one that the Lord has chosen for Joshua to bring him into this world. But he also has birth parents, biological parents that are going to be a part of his life. That'll be his choice, how much a part. But so you've got to go through that process.
And
definitely.
be comfortable with it. Linda, you have an adopted son and a biological daughter. What's it been like to have one of each?
Well, I was really surprised because one of the things I thought is, will I be able to bond with this adopted child in the same way I would if I would give birth to a child? And
And Matthew came first.
Matthew came first, the adopted child, and the wonderful surprise of that was as soon as you have that baby, and in my case, I even nursed this child from day one, and that's something that adoptive parents don't usually think about doing, but as soon as you have this baby in your arms and you know that God has placed this child with you, all of that worry or anxiety about that just goes away. And comparing it to then later giving birth to Katie, it didn't feel any different. And I just think that's part of the blessing that God does in preparation for an adoption for the parents.
There's almost that awesome feeling that from before the beginning of time, God had always known that this wasn't just an accident that's going to now be made right somehow for both parties, but that God knew that that child was going to be raised by you.
And let me say with the infertility, because what the Newmans were saying before is just so important, that that when people are thinking of the option of adopting a baby, that they really cannot look at this like, well, we couldn't do it this way, we really need to do it another way. You really have to really see adoption as a positive way of the way God is going to build your family and the way God is bringing your family together. And it's not some kind of other option, it's the way God's going to do it.
And it's not something to just sort of on whim decide to do either. This is not like getting into a situation where a child can or ever should be returned. You need to know in your heart this is right. There are also some chances you take along the way. Now, you all had a disappointment in the process.
Right. A summer ago, a birth mother had chosen us for her child, and we knew about 3 weeks to a month ahead of time. And the day before birth, she changed her mind.
And we had nursery already.
We had nursery ready, just had everything ready. Friends brought over stuff, and it was like having a miscarriage. I wouldn't equate it to that degree because my body didn't go through that kind of, but certainly emotionally, it was such a miscarriage. So there are,
And that's one of the worries that a lot of people face, is that they don't want to get their hopes up and then have it not happen, or have the birth mother change her mind within a certain time of legally too.
And that brings up another issue. You know, you talked about people being afraid of, will I bond emotionally with a child that I didn't actually give birth to? But one of the other fears I think people have is, where do we go with this birth parent that's sort of off there in the wings? And adoption is a very open process for a lot of people today. How do you deal with that, Linda?
Well, there's a lot of controversy in the research in this area. There is a lot being done because now we have these open adoptions, and we have semi-open and very open, and there's really an extreme in terms of no information to, they're inviting them to the family picnic. So there's this wide range, and I think you really need to pray about it, and everybody's situation is very different. There are some times when the birth mother can be included in the family and it works, other times when that isn't a good idea, and you really want to make sure that the adoptive family feels a sense of their own personal boundaries as well. So there are good things that come out of that in terms of you have knowledge of the history, and you have maybe seen the birth mother and father, and you can tell the child more about that. But all of that openness and that kind of change in some of the adoption things needs to be handled, I think, developmentally with the child. That as the child grows, there are certain things to tell them when they're very little. You and I have talked that when they were very little and they would say, "Did I come out of your tummy?" We would say, "No, you came out of our heart." And for a small child, they smiled, and that was enough. And as they get older, you have to address the questions more on the developmental level that they're functioning and the things that they ask.
Now, I'm sure you all have thought about this as I have. What are you going to do if your child wants to know his or her adoptive parents? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things our plans are, obviously Joshua's still too young, but we're just going to bring him up. We're not going to keep it a secret. We'll just be discussing that you are an adopted child, and we'll just make it a natural part. He's just going to know that as much as anything. As he learns his last name, he's going to know he was adopted, and that's
Cindy,
and we're encouraging the birth parents through the agency we worked with to send as much as they want to. Pictures, we would like pictures because he is going to want to know his biological roots. I think, maybe not. It's up to Joshua. It'll be up to him. We are going to let him know, but if they can send pictures, maybe the birth mother has mementos. We're just going to keep it open, and I'm going to keep it aside for him. And as Linda said, only when he's mature enough to handle it. It's certainly not a secret. Adoption is not a secret.
No, it shouldn't be.
Yeah, when people try and make it a secret, like it was years ago, where many children that have been adopted and they're adults now, they're clueless as to where they came from. Well, I don't think that's fair if the child wants to find out. Not every adopted child is going to want to look for a birth parent, and I think that's unfair to think that too.
Would that be threatening to you if Joshua wanted to?
Well, I'm sure I'll have a lot of anxiety, and I'm sure I'll have a lot of fear, but it's so new to me. We've had him for 3 months.
And I think that decreases as you get more and more into the process of incorporating this child into your family.
Now, Matthew is how old now?
He's 8 now.
He's 8. How would you feel if he wanted to meet his mother?
I from the beginning said that we would help him do that, and I think you have more fears about that when you initially adopt, and as you get much more into the relationship with the child, those fears begin to dissipate. But I think it's a healthy thing to say, if this is what you want to do and this is important, we will support you in doing that. And that's encouraged, actually, psychologically.
And of course, there are wonderful biblical characters who
Yes.
are adopted. Moses is the greatest one, and actually, our child had a word over him just when we dedicated it. It said, "Just as I chose Moses from one place and placed him in another, so I have chosen Joshua." I just get choked up when I think of it. And I'm going to put words in his mouth, and he is going to be fruitful. God knew, Psalm 139, before he was even knit in the womb, that he was going to be for Drew and I, and he would minister to us, and we would minister to him. It's a two-way process, too. I think it's important to know when you adopt, it's not just you're getting the child, but God has plans for us, too. And Joshua, for this moment in time, is the child for us.
And let me quickly say that in the throes of adolescence, when children are really interested in their identity, this is a time when they may request to look. And you encourage that hope and that desire, but I think from what we know in the medical community, the APA and the child psychiatry literature, that it's best to encourage them to actually do that in adulthood when they have the maturity, when they have the emotional stability to do that you don't say, no, you can't. You encourage them that we're going to do this, but we're going to do this when you're emotionally ready to do it.
You know, I think so many people struggle with infertility, and there are so many people who have a heart for adoption, even if they've given birth to children, that I get asked all the time, as I'm sure all of you do, how do we find an agency? How do we figure this out? We want to let you know that there are agencies available for you. We'd like to tell you more about how you can find agencies. Call us if you'd like us to put you in touch with someone who can do that. There are lists of agencies, some, as you said earlier, with very open adoptions, some with more limited openness to them. But we want you more than anything to meet baby Joshua, because this is, when God's got a plan, it's a good one.
Style and sandals.
Hi, Joshua. Oh,
There
he is precious.
He was 4 months, July 23rd. He just ate, so he's kind of relaxed right now.
Now, how old
But,
was Joshua when you got him?
He was just under a month.
Can I hold him?
And a lot of adopted babies are placed with a foster family with the adoption agency for about 25 days to make sure the birth mother is sure she wants to do this. So that's not an uncommon way to do
we
it.
actually that's why we found out at the last minute how to do it.
Yes.
But isn't he sweet?
He is precious.
You're not too excited, are you?
Drew, did you pick out those shoes?
I wish I had.
These are
Wish I
probably
had.
the kind that the rollerblades come off of and can be put on
Already
after.
had him out. And actually his grandmother, my mother, gave him this outfit. So
Hi, Joshua.
oh, we're
he
hoping
is
he'll be a water skier and a rollerblader.
Oh, he will be.
And a hiker and
He's wonderful.
he's wonderful. And now he's just at 4 months, the brain synapses, I'm reading all about this now, start connecting and the memory starts going in. So
He says, what's that
knows
lady
who we
talking
are.
about? Brain synapses?
Oh, you can smile because you know who
You
we are.
know, the joke in our family always is when we look at little Matthew, we say, we couldn't have created a child that cute.
Well, he is a beauty.
He is sweet, and of course now I can dress him up, but when he's older, forget it. I mean, now I'm taking he's like my little doll.
Trust me,
you know?
as one who has older children, take advantage of it while you can. Thank you all for sharing your stories with us and for sharing so candidly with us about God's wonderful plan and purpose for your lives and for your children's. It's an awesome thing.